I entered my apartment on a warm night in July and immediately kicked off my heels. I had been on my feet for 8 hours, and they were protesting. Holding my 3 bags of groceries, I slowly moved to the kitchen in my bare feet and sighed at the stove. I was in no mood to cook. I opened my delivery app and ordered Greek food. Marinated lamb and potatoes sounded good to me. I put away my groceries, showered, made ice water, and dropped onto my couch, waiting for my delivery in my favorite pink teddy bear pajamas. My name is Brielle Allison Rayburn, and at 32 years old, I worked as a bank manager. I often filled in as a teller while several colleagues were on vacation, as I did this week. During my time as a full-time teller, I wore comfortable shoes, but my feet still hurt. Having to do more, and in heels, was absolutely painful. I vowed to purchase stools for the tellers first thing Monday morning. I was promoted 15 months ago, becoming the youngest branch manager in the company's history, and I did not take that lightly. I was at my desk at 7 every morning, 6 days a week, and I worked for 2 hours after closing, making sure everything ran smoothly. I was tired, but no complaints were ever made about my branch, so I endured it. My delivery arrived, and I sat in front of my TV, enjoying my meal with a glass of wine. The next thing I knew, it was 6:07 in the morning, and my cell was going off. I did not need to see the ID to know that it was my mother calling from England. When I was 12, my parents divorced. Mom had been growing distant, and it was eventually revealed that she was having an affair with her boss, an English lawyer who had been in town for the past year to oversee operations at his firm's American branch. My mom worked as a legal secretary at Taylor, Hemmings, and Braun, and she admitted that she couldn't resist William Charles Taylor. She was even turned on by his accent. My 12-year-old ears hearing her say that made me want to hurl. My father owned a comfort food diner on the other side of town with his 3 brothers, which had been successful since their grandparents started it. Dad was not rich. He was well off, but when my parents divorced, Mom said all she wanted was half of their savings account, and she'd forfeit everything else, including me. Fool, my dad had said. How can you choose money over your daughter? Mom sighed. I'm relinquishing physical custody, not leaving her life. She'll visit me in England in the summers, and there will be virtual visits throughout the rest of the year. England, I asked. Smiling, Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm marrying William there in the fall, honey. Of course. You'll be at my side, and I'll make sure you'll be back in the States before school starts. I pulled away and whispered, I don't want to. Dad squeezed my hand and said to Mom, and holidays? I'll take Christmas, Mom said. You can have everything else. What about my birthday? I asked softly. Dad kissed my head and said, I'll make sure they're all epic, I promise. Spoiler alert. He absolutely did, every year. Can we sign now? Mom sighed. What's your rush? Dad snapped. Allison Rose Lewis Rayburn smiled with pure venom. William and I are leaving in a few hours. I don't want to miss my flight. You're going today, I screeched. What about a goodbye lunch, Mom? She shrugged. Last night was sufficient, honey. Don't be so clingy. Last night was a rushed, fast food dinner in her car after a day of me watching her shop. She had bought me a pair of shoes that I kinda liked, and a purse. She said I needed to start carrying one since I was becoming a woman. It was pink with silver accents, and I did not like it. Asked Mom to buy a gray one with a large black clasp, and she frowned at it, claiming it was a little masculine or something. I took that pink thing home and tossed it into the back of my closet. I didn't see it again until I packed to move out of my father's home when I graduated from college at 22. I sold it on eBay for an obscene amount of money. Annoyed, my father, Theodore Rayburn, snatched the documents from his lawyer, who kept his face neutral and gruffly signed his name several times. After, he threw his pen on the table, grabbed my hand, stood, and rushed us from the room. Mom married William in England 6 months later and was already pregnant. She had 2 sons, William and David, and a daughter, Claire, with him before declaring they were done. I'd fly out for Christmas break, and every night, we'd all sit around the dinner table with Anson, William's son from his previous marriage, in total silence. Summers were no better. We were forbidden to do anything but study or read. That's how I learned the piano. It was the only studying I wanted to do, in any summer. Except for horse riding. Dad married Sonia Evans 2 years after his divorce, and she had a daughter named Daisy, who was only a year younger than me. Daisy's father was in the military, so she would visit him wherever he was stationed during the summer. The four of us got along really well, and Daisy quickly became my best friend. After our summer visits away, we would spend our first night back talking, laughing, and eating until dawn, or either Dad or Sonia would make us go to our rooms and sleep. I always missed Daisy, and she would happily cry as soon as she saw me enter the airport when I was picked up. Sighing, I picked up my cell. "Mom, it's 6 in the morning on a Saturday. Why are you calling me?" "Is that really the way to answer a call, Brielle?" I snorted and repeated, 6 a.m. on a Saturday, Mom. "Well, it's 11 here, so deal." She scoffed and said, "I'm calling this early because I wanted to catch you before you left for work, honey. I need to talk to you." I went to my closet after rolling my eyes. "You have 10 minutes, Mom. I have to be at work in an hour."
"Why?"
"The bank doesn't open until 10 today." "Mom," I shouted. "Focus." "All right, honey. Calm down." She went quiet, and I lost all patience. "Mom, get on with it. I need to shower and change." Mom cleared her throat and said, "Fine. Honey, I need a little favor." I frowned. "From me?" Hard to believe, I know, but yes. I sat on my made bed and blinked.
"Okay."
"What do you need?" "For you to move to England and marry Anson, but only for a year or so." I blinked again and said, "What?" She went on with, "Anson's mother died a few weeks ago, as you know, and she left him a huge bequest, but he can't get it unless he marries and has a child within 2 years. Since you're not seeing anyone, we figured you wouldn't mind helping him out with this. Of course, he will kindly settle on you after the child is born, and you can walk away." I realized I listened with my mouth open, in complete shock, and the frown I held was giving me a headache, or it could have been the bullshit she was asking me to do. I shook my head and said, "Let me get this straight. You want me to marry your intolerable stepson, let him touch me in a way that would only repulse me, and impregnate me. Then we'd divorce, and I'd come back to America with a settlement and a child with no father because he'd be across the world, forgetting that he made a kid?" Mom snapped, "No, Brielle. The children would remain with Anson, and you'd be free to do whatever you want." I gasped. "Children?" "Honestly," Mom said, "it depends on the sex of the child. Anson needs a son to get the entire inheritance. When he's married, he'll get a third, but once he produces a son, he'll get it all, honey. I mean, we're talking $2 billion. That man can't find a woman, marry her, and live off almost $700 million? Mom said, "Why should he when there's so much more waiting for him? He could even knock her up and collect every penny. All the women in the UK. Why bring this nonsense to me, Mom? Because we know we can trust that you'll sign a prenup and not try to take all of poor Anson's money. Shame on Betty for doing this to her only son. What was she thinking when she made that will? The audacity threw me. Mom, I've got to go. Tell me your answer soon, honey. William and I will be waiting for your call." That evening, I went to dinner at Dad's as I usually did on the weekends. Daisy embraced me and insisted I sit next to her. Sitting across from us were Jason and Annelle, who were 17 and 15, and the 2 kids Dad made with Sonia. Both had dates and left after the meal. We cleaned and sat in the living room, where I told Dad, Sonia, and Daisy everything Mom asked of me. Dad was immediately enraged, and we could hear him yelling at Mom from the kitchen, where he wanted to talk to her in private, he said. "Why did he even bother to leave the room?" Sonia sighed. Daisy and I shrugged. I had no clue. I said, "I don't know why he's more angered than I am. I mean, it's not a horrible idea, except the part where I'd have to foo." I blinked at Sonia. Have sex with him. I wonder if he'd consider IVF. Brielle Allison Rayburn. Sonia snapped. "You are not considering this, I know." Daisy and I jumped at her tone. My stepmom was beyond pissed. I wrinkled my nose. "I mean, look at what's offered, Sonia. Marriage, a child, money at the end. My life could change at a signature, and I'd never have to work in heels again." Sonia's nose flared as she sat up straight. "If wearing heels to work is bothering you, find a new career or wear flats. You will not have a child, and then walk away from it." And if you had a girl first, that would be at least 2 children you'd never see. Need I remind you of your life after the age of 12, young lady? I blinked and thought over her words. You're right, Sonia. I couldn't do to a child or children what my mother did to me. I want children and to be married before they came, but I couldn't even think of leaving any child of mine behind. Pleased, my stepmother nodded. Now you're thinking clearly, sweetie. And keep your eyes open. I don't know why your mother even entertained this with you. What was that woman thinking? I frowned. Why would Mom bring that to me? What would she have to gain if I agreed to it? Dad returned and angrily dropped onto the couch next to his wife. He bopped so hard that he made Sonia bounce. He's broke, Dad snapped. Failed investments, overspending, and his client list is decreasing. They're bordering on desperation now, and she even asked me for a loan for their oldest boy's wedding next summer. If Anson marries soon, then that would amply bail them out, and a baby would seal the deal. We were silent for a moment. So, they just want my ring finger and an egg, and they'll live happily ever after? Dad nodded. Teddy, Sonia called, gently rubbing his shoulder. Are you considering the loan? Bad risk, he sighed. They only have their home as collateral. It's an old family estate, and William owns it outright. If Anson doesn't marry within 90 days, William will be forced to sell it to settle debts, and there will be nothing left. We'd be out of thousands. I can't entertain that, with 2 more children to put through college, and we have 3 weddings to pay for and participate on another, possibly. Then there's our retirement plans. No, I can't risk it. They're that broke, Teddy, Daisy asked. They are, my father confirmed. But I feel there's more. I was with that woman for 15 years, so I know when she's holding back. I went to work on Monday with my mother's issues and requests in the back of my mind. I could not help them, mother or not, and felt bad that I didn't feel any guilt over having to turn her down.
How could I do this for them?
Doing so, no, I couldn't. Sonia called me as I unlocked my apartment 2 weeks later in a panic. Tell me she's with you, she cried. Sonia, who I demanded, freezing in my doorway.
Daisy, she said.
We haven't seen or heard from her in 6 days. She's not here, I insisted. But she did call me last night. She didn't say from where? No, I said, panicking. She just said she had something big coming up and would call me after. Daisy didn't elaborate, but I figured it had something to do with the school. Daisy teaches 5th grade, Brie.
What could be secretive about that?
I don't know, I said, finally closing the door. I sat on the couch and thought over our last conversation. Have you been to her apartment or called the school? Sonia wept, every day. They told me she took leave until next year and didn't give a reason, only that it was an emergency and had to do with family. Her place is locked up tight, and I don't have a key. I rushed to their home and held Sonia while Dad and his youngest brother made calls. I managed to get soup into my stepmother, but nothing else. I was at my wit's end with her and Daisy when my cell pinged. I checked my messages and screamed when I saw the photo. Dad rushed to me with Uncle Dave, who snatched my phone when I couldn't say a word about what I had seen. What is it? Sonia demanded. It's Daisy, Dad answered. He held Sonia and whispered, Honey, she's in England, and she married Anson 2 days ago. Uncle Dave said a phone call would not suffice, and Dad agreed. We bought tickets to England that night. I took a leave of absence from the bank, and that gave me 3 weeks to talk some sense into Daisy before she managed to get pregnant, if she hadn't over the past 2 days. Dad, Sonia, Uncle Dave, and Frank and I arrived at Heathrow 4 days later. It was a hot day there, and the taxi driver assured us that the AC would cool us down quickly as he navigated us to the Taylor estate, where Daisy and her new family awaited us. I was ready to throttle my mother for allowing this to happen. When we arrived, Daisy greeted us with a smile in the foyer and led us to what William always called the sitting room. She said, Before any of you start, just know that I'm clear-headed and know what I'm doing. Sonia demanded, Then why sneak off, Daisy Lynn? Daisy scoffed, Because I heard what you said to Brie, and I knew you'd just flip out if I told you that I decided to marry Anson, Mom. If you think for 1 minute, Sonia said, pointing her finger in Daisy's face, that I am going to condone you leaving my grandchild in England while you gallivant, wherever, then you are damn wrong. Really, Sonia? My mother chided as she joined us with William and Anson. All the histrionics are not necessary. We'll take care of the children as we've taken care of our own. Sonia whirled around. You mean by leaving one behind and shipping the others off to boarding school the moment they were old enough to attend? We raise our own, Dad snapped. Daisy, get your things. He's married and should have his money soon, so you're no longer needed. We'll file an annulment as soon as we land on American soil. Anson, marry another and use her body to get the rest of it. On what grounds? William asked and sipped his whiskey. I'm afraid they've consummated the marriage, and both knew full well what they were getting into. I looked at Daisy and gave her the ick face. She mouthed dry spell. I was even more disgusted. I'd never be that desperate. Anson James Taylor was 6 feet tall with brown hair and eyes and a cute face. If he had an ounce of decency, he'd be tolerable. As it was, the man could never look in the eye of any woman in his age range because he was too busy ogling their breasts. He enjoyed visiting the States simply because several women told him that his accent was sexy with his deep voice. One of my coworkers actually had a quickie with him at the bank when he visited during my second year there. I was disgusted with her for at least a week. Damn it, Sonia wailed. What have you done, Daisy? Mom, relax, Daisy said and hugged her mother. I swear I know what I'm doing. Now how about we visit a pub with Anson so you can get to know him? Unless you're tired from your flight. Let me show you to your room, and after you freshen up, you can tell me what you'd like to do while you're here, Mom. Sonia pulled away from Daisy. I am not staying here. Teddy, let's go to the hotel. Daisy, you will accompany us without that man.
Now.
I moved to follow Dad, Sonia, Daisy, and the uncles, but my mother gripped my arm, stilling me. I frowned at her. Mom demanded, Where are you going, honey? You've always had a room here. I scoffed. Not this time, I don't. I'm going with Dad. On English soil, Mom growled. You stay with your mother, adult or not. I rolled my eyes at her. Breakfast in the morning, I called to Dad. Absolutely, he snapped. But not in this house. Their maid had already taken my bags to my room, and I left the Taylors in their sitting room.
I didn't want to talk to either member of that family.
I was beyond pissed at William and Mom for allowing Daisy to marry Anson, when neither had any love for one another. They had only met 3 times, and that was during his visit where he stup-tupped my coworker. I lasted all of 7 minutes in that room before my temper drove me back into the hallway. The house was too quiet in the wrong way, the kind of way that meant people were whispering behind closed doors and calling it civility. I stepped out barefoot, meaning only to go to the kitchen for tea and a snack, when I heard low voices drifting from the library at the end of the corridor. The door was not fully shut. William's voice reached me first, smooth and clipped. 90 days was already impossible, and now we're wasting time soothing her family. If Daisy loses her nerve, we are finished. My mother answered in the same cold tone she used when discussing table settings or the latest fashions. She won't lose it. She's sentimental, not stupid. Daisy and Anson both know they're the ones who can save us all. I froze with one hand braced against the wall. Save them all? My heart thudded harder when William answered Mom, sounding far less charming than he ever did in public, if that's possible. I mean, that guy has always been a slime, and I felt Anson was no better. Then keep Brielle away from her. She asks too many questions, and Daisy's always had a hero complex where her sister is concerned. He said sister mockingly, as the word itself amused him. Once the doctor confirms a pregnancy, none of this will matter anyway, so let us hope it's happened already. My stomach turned. I still could not understand how Daisy could let that man touch her. I reached my room and shut the door as quietly as my shaking hands would allow. Only then did I notice the folded card on my pillow, half hidden beneath the bedspread as if someone had placed it there in a hurry. My name was written across the front in Daisy's loopy handwriting. Inside, there were only 2 words. Trust me. When did she leave that in my room? I thought as I got into bed. I barely slept. Every time I shut my eyes, I heard William's voice again, once the doctor confirms a pregnancy, and saw Daisy's handwriting on that card. By the time the sky outside my window turned the pale gray of early morning, I was ready to pull my hair out. A soft knock came at my door just after 7, and I had long given up on finding sleep. I pulled on a robe and opened the door to find Daisy in a sheer gown, her hair twisted into a loose knot, and her face stripped of every bit of false brightness she had worn downstairs. She slipped inside and shut the door behind her. "You're still skeptical, aren't you?" she whispered. I crossed my arms. "Yeah, because I know something is very wrong with this situation, Daisy." She took both my hands, and I felt how cold hers were. Daisy was nervous, possibly scared. "You need to get everyone back to the United States," she said.
Don't argue with me.
"They will try to stay and fight, and that will make this worse. Just get them onto a plane today, if possible." I stared at her. "Daisy, absolutely not. You vanished, married a man you do not love, and now you want me to herd our family back across the ocean while you stay here alone? Have you lost your mind?" My voice rose with each word until she flinched and glanced at the door. Daisy shushed me and insisted, "No, I have not lost my mind." Her eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. "William is worse off than your father said. It is not only investments but also debt that comes with people calling at odd hours with threats. William used Anson's inheritance as collateral before Anson ever qualified for it. If this falls apart now, they will not just lose the estate. These people will turn to whoever they think can force another solution to settle their books." She squeezed my fingers harder. "And after seeing you and the others, William has decided our side of the family looks like a resource. He thinks he can hit up Theo for money if the callers force the issue before the first part of the inheritance comes through, which won't be for about 2 months. My blood went cold.
So come with us, I said. Right now.
We will leave before breakfast and let them choke on their own mess. Daisy shook her head. If I disappear now, they will panic, and panic makes careless men dangerous. As long as I stay calm and keep playing the dutiful wife, they'll believe they still have control. That buys time for Theo to get home, for you to warn him properly, and for me to do what I came here to do. I searched her face. What did you come here to do, Daisy? She shrugged. At first, it was the money. Anson, Allison, and William knew that and didn't care, as long as I signed the prenup. And did you? I asked with a raised brow. I did, with a solicitor I chose with help from the firm we use in the States. He made sure I'd be beyond comfortable at the end of the marriage, and added clauses for children.
He's not keeping any of them.
I nodded, glad she was thinking clearly, sort of. I asked, and now what? For one long moment, Daisy said nothing. Then she whispered, there are papers in William's study. Accounts, letters, signed promises. Enough to ruin him and maybe keep worse men away once the truth is out. I know where he hides them. I've seen them. The man's a hard gambler and bets on anything. That's why he and Allison came back to England when you were 12. William was up to his nose in debt from cards, ponies, and more. Anson has issues, too, but different from his father's, and William's also means that your mom is in the line of fire. I just need to get pregnant, and this will all be over because a positive pregnancy will mean the marriage funds will be released sooner. She released my hands and pressed something small into my palm, her favorite pendant she got from her father for her 16th. If Teddy refuses to leave without me, show him this and tell him I swore I would come back for it as soon as possible. Assure my mom that I love her and enough to make her furious. Tell them all to go home and wait for my call. I stared at her, wondering if the death of her father a year earlier had anything to do with her behavior. She missed him and seemed desperate to make her own family after she laid him to rest. My throat tightened so badly I could hardly breathe. Before I could answer, footsteps sounded in the hall, slow, deliberate, and coming straight for my door. Daisy's head snapped toward it. She backed away from me so quickly it was as if the last 5 minutes had never happened. Remember what I said, she breathed. Daisy opened my door after a knock to find Anson standing there, grinning. He hinted at going another round, and I had to hold my mouth in order not to hurl everywhere. I prayed they made a male child soon so that she didn't have to endure sleeping with him for long. I finally convinced everyone to leave Daisy to do what she needed to do, and we flew home 2 days later. Daisy made weekly calls, and 2 months into the marriage, she was announced that she was pregnant. She kept us posted on her progress and said she didn't need us to fly out to see her, not yet. We waited on pins and needles as the weeks seemed to snail by. Near Daisy's due date, Sonia and I were halfway through a miserable attempt at a movie when my phone rang, and the moment I saw Daisy's name, my heart leapt into my throat. I answered on the first ring. She sounded exhausted, shaky, and happier than I had heard her in months. "My son is here, Brie," she whispered. Sonia burst into tears. My first grandchild. A son meant the final condition had been met. I texted our flight window that Monday to Daisy. She asked us to delay the trip and she would send new dates soon. Then, no more heels, Brie. The remainder of Anson's inheritance, totaling $2.8 billion, has been successfully dispersed.
Quit that job.
Dad sat at the kitchen table and stared at the figure like it might catch fire if he looked at it long enough. Sonia crossed herself twice, even though she only did that at funerals and when she was truly stunned. I thought Daisy would finally sound relieved, but when I called to congratulate her, there was something strange in her voice, calm, but hollow around the edges, like she was bracing for impact and promised to call me when she found 2 moments together, or we'd talk when we arrived. A week before we were to fly out, Daisy called me just after dawn, and I knew before she spoke that something terrible had happened. Her voice was hoarse, scraped raw.
"Anson died," she said.
"Last night." For a moment, I could not make sense of the words. He had been alive, wealthy, and seemingly over the moon about his son's arrival only 7 days earlier. Daisy drew in a ragged breath and told me the truth no one else had known. Anson had cancer that advanced quickly. He had known before the marriage and had told no one but Daisy because he was furious that his father had buried the family in debt and intended to feast on an inheritance Anson might never live long enough to enjoy. According to Daisy, Anson had decided that if he was going to die, then William would not get the satisfaction of seeing a penny of his money. The baby was now 2 months old, and the 3 of them had holed up in their own home for the past 5 months, while Anson deteriorated without the others knowing. It was a long, painful process, and Daisy had nursed him with staff through the entire thing. Anson and Daisy had the paternity proven, then Anson had changed his will quietly, thoroughly, and with the kind of cold precision I would never have expected from a man who spent most of his life acting like a spoiled cat. He left everything, every house, account, investment, title, and dollar, to Daisy and their son. William was cut out entirely. So was my mother, except for whatever embarrassment she could salvage from the gossip. Daisy had also said that all Anson did was pull them even and made her promise not to give them another dime when he was gone because William's settlement from his mother should have lasted 2 lifetimes, but he and Mom carelessly squandered it with their lifestyle and his debts. I sat on the edge of my bed after the call ended and stared at the wall, stunned by the cruel symmetry of it all. Daisy had walked into that house to save me, and somehow she had come out of it a widow with a newborn, a fortune, and the kind of power men like William had spent years trying to keep from women like her. Dad said we were on the next flight to England, and for once, no one argued. Daisy told us not to rush, that she needed 48 hours to get through the funeral arrangements and the first wave of lawyers, but I already knew waiting was impossible. Whatever Anson had been in life, in the end, he had made one final decision that changed everything. And if William Taylor thought grief would make Daisy weak, then he was about to learn what happens when he mistook survival for surrender. England in October felt colder than it had any right to, or maybe that was only the mood waiting for us at the estate. The house looked the same from the outside, gray stone, clipped hedges, windows polished to a shine, but the moment we stepped inside, I knew the balance of power had shifted. Staff moved more quietly. Doors closed faster. And every glance that landed on Daisy carried a new calculation. We found Daisy in the morning room with a baby in her arms and a black dress buttoned to her throat. She looked exhausted, pale, and heartbreakingly thin, but there was steel in her face I had never seen before. Her son, my nephew, though no blood made it any less true in my mind, slept against her chest in a white blanket with one tiny fist tucked beneath his chin. When Sonia reached them, Daisy let her hold the baby, but not before her gaze flicked to every doorway, like she was counting exits. The funeral was 2 days later under a graying sky. I had never imagined I would attend Anson Taylor's burial and feel anything close to pity, but grief has a way of sanding down the edges of even the worst memories. William stood rigid through the service, all injured dignity and clenched jaw, while my mother dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief as if sorrow were a role she had rehearsed. Daisy said almost nothing. She held her son in the family pew until the last possible moment, then passed him to Sonia and walked to the grave with her head high, black veil lifting in the wind like a warning flag. If the burial bruised William's pride, the reading of the will finish the job. The solicitor had the clipped, merciless tone of a man who enjoyed precision more than people. He confirmed what Daisy had already told us. Every asset passed to Daisy and her son, Anson James Taylor II, to be administered exactly as Anson had written it. William received nothing beyond a personal letter, which he crushed in his hand without reading aloud. My mother went white around the mouth. Claire burst into tears. One of the younger boys actually asked if there had been some mistake, and for a single, ugly second, the room filled with the crackle of a family realizing money had never been love, only leverage. William waited until the solicitor left before making his move. "This is absurd," he snapped, rounding on Daisy in the drawing room. "You cannot possibly manage this estate alone. You'll need guidance, legal oversight, experienced hands." "I have all three," Daisy said, so calmly that even I straightened in surprise. She sat by the fire with the baby asleep in a bassinet beside her, one hand resting lightly on the edge as if she could guard him with that touch alone. "What I do not need is a gambler with a talent for ruin giving me advice about stewardship." I nearly choked. My mother gasped. Dad looked openly impressed. Sonia nodded like this was always Daisy's way. That should have been the end of it, but my mother had never known when to retreat. "Don't be foolish, Daisy," she said sharply. "This family can still be civilized if you stop acting like you've won a war." Daisy turned her head slowly and looked at her with such icy clarity that the room went silent. "I did win one," she replied. "And if either of you challenges my son's security, I will hand William's papers to the people he owes and let them decide how civilized they feel." A silence followed, so complete I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel. Then William's face changed, not outrage this time, but fear. And in that instant, I understood Daisy had found more in that study than enough to ruin him. She had found enough to bury him. I might have felt triumphant if I had not noticed the footman lingering just outside the half-open door, his expression blank and his attention fixed too carefully on the room. The second he saw me looking, he moved on. A chill slithered down my spine. William was not the only man who knew those papers existed. And if Daisy was right about the kind of people attached to his debts, then widowhood, wealth, and a newborn son had not made her safer at all. They had only painted a larger target on her back. "What about my wedding next summer?" my half-brother William Jr. demanded. "Anson wanted to help pay for it." "That's a lie," Daisy said in that cool tone. "He told you that last summer, with me in the room. You know why he changed his mind?" William Jr. reddened and looked away. "Why did Anson change his mind?" I asked. Daisy looked at me. "Anson James is not their first grandchild. Junior has a daughter with their cook's daughter that he refused to acknowledge, and she's already 2. Anson told Junior that if she was good enough to lie in his bed, then she was good enough to be the mother of his child. His fiancée has no idea. If he had admitted it and Pearl forgave him, Anson would have given him the world, but he kept still, and so did Anson's money." Next, Daisy turned to David and Claire, her glare still cold. In a hard tone, Daisy said, "Shame on the two of you for thinking you deserved anything from Anson. That was his mother's money, and she did not have to leave you anything, and neither did Anson. Kindly recall that the reason his parents divorced was because your father decided to fuck the whore that is your mother." William was lucky to get what his solicitors fought for in that settlement. Mom gasped while Dad and Sonia laughed with me. I couldn't help it. Both marriages imploded because of their affair. A week later, all was settled, and Daisy announced she was moving back to America with the baby. Her lawyer had already found a property for them. Next, she said that she was retiring Dad, Sonia, and me, and that we were living on the expansive property with her and Anson Jr. Dad, Sonia, and I stared at her in awe. And us, David, my other half-brother, asked. Daisy's head tilted. That's for your parents to decide, but if I were you, I wouldn't depend on either of them. Check their track record on life's obstacles. My advice, get your father into a rehab center today. He needs the help, she said, eyeing the glass in my stepfather's hand. Looks like alcohol is becoming an issue, too. So you're leaving us high and dry, Claire shouted. Daisy shouted back. Did you not just hear me tell Junior my thoughts on that matter, Claire? That lady's money has no ties for you. Your father swindled everything he was given in the settlement, and what he was bequeathed from your grandparents. If you have nothing, then blame him, not Elizabeth Waltham. I mean, Anson's settling down didn't look promising, and he was her only child, so excuse her for wanting her legacy to continue. Daisy stood. Mom moved to her and said, just a little to get us through, please, Daisy. We need to start over, and we don't have enough to run the house. Perhaps you should consider selling, Daisy snorted. Anson gave you enough when he received his first payout, and it was enough to reduce your legal debts to zero. William slammed his glass on the table, shattering it. He barely noticed. Young lady, he said, trembling. I'll have you know that this house has been in the Taylor family for 6 generations. It will not be sold. Daisy nodded. Then good luck in maintaining it. I have my instructions, and I'm following them to the last letter. Family, shall we go? We have a plane to catch. 1 year later, the house Daisy bought in Westchester still startled me sometimes. It sat behind iron gates and old maple trees, with more bedrooms and bathrooms than any sane family needed, but somehow it had become ours in all the ways that mattered. Dad and Sonia had their suite on the first floor. Jason and Annelle came and went like comets, and even though Daisy settled millions on me, I had finally resigned from the bank only 2 months before. I spent my days helping Daisy manage the endless machinery of attorneys, accountants, trustees, and security consultants that came with inheriting a fortune and surviving the people who wanted it. Anson James Mickens Taylor turned one in a navy sweater and tiny leather shoes he kicked off under the dining room table before the cake was served. He had Daisy's willful chin, Anson's dark eyes, and the unsettling habit of studying a room before deciding whether to smile at it. Daisy laughed more now, but it was never careless. The softness had returned around the edges of her face, yet there was a sharpened quality to her too, as if grief and power had forged her into someone both warmer and more dangerous. She trusted fewer people. She missed nothing. And she had become so good at command that even men twice her age sat straighter when she entered a room. On paper, most of the chaos was over. William had been forced to sell off parcels of land, dismiss half the staff, and lease the old estate house to some absurdly wealthy film producer for tax relief. My mother remained in England with him in a drafty wing she now called cozy, with the desperation of a woman trying to make ruin sound intentional. Daisy had placed the rest of Anson's holdings into structures so fortified that even I, with a banker's background, sometimes needed a diagram to follow them. For the first time in a long while, it almost felt as if we were safe. Which, of course, was when England knocked on our front door again. It happened 3 days after Anson James's birthday party. My dad and Sonia were riding horses on the grounds, and I was in the study reviewing trust summaries when Miguel from security came in and said, "Very carefully, Ms. Rayburn, there is a gentleman here from London who says Mrs. Taylor will want to see him." He would not give a name, only this. He handed me a cream card with a gold crest and 4 words written across the back in black ink. "Alison Taylor has disappeared." "My mother," I whispered in horror, and went cold. For one absurd second, I was 13 years old again, standing in an airport terminal with a suitcase and a mother who only remembered my existence a week before I was due to fly in for a visit. I looked through the study's glass doors and saw Daisy on the terrace with her sleeping son on her hip, sunlight falling across her hair. I carried the card outside without a word. Daisy read it once, then lifted her eyes to mine, and every trace of warmth vanished from her face. She shifted Anson James against her shoulder and turned the card over again and said, "This is from the man William feared most." A pulse started pounding in my throat. "How do you know?" Daisy looked toward the front drive, where a dark car idled, and held up the front of the card. I saw this crest on one of William's letters from the study. The debt attached to it was never settled. She handed the card back to me. I need you to give the baby to Netta. I'll have Miguel secure our parents and bring the man to the blue sitting room. Meet us there after securing Anson James with Netta. She paused, her voice dropping to something calm and lethal. If they have come all the way to New York, Bree, they're looking for leverage. I found Netta in the nursery's bathroom, arranging diapers and wipes. I said nothing, but the nanny took one look at my face and nodded. I left them, hearing her bolt the door behind me. The two of them would be safe in that room for weeks. She would only come out if one of us told her that it was safe, so there were no worries. By the time I returned to the blue sitting room, it had been cleared of staff, the curtains drawn against the late afternoon glare, and Daisy was seated on the sofa as if she hosted dangerous men every day before tea. Do not engage, Brielle, she murmured moments before Miguel showed the man in without a word. Our guest was perhaps 50, silver at the temples, elegant in the way very expensive men often are, with a dark coat that fit too well and eyes that missed nothing. He carried no briefcase, no hat, no visible threat, which somehow made him more alarming. Mrs. Taylor, he said, inclining his head toward Daisy before turning to me. Ms. Rayburn. My employer regrets the intrusion, but regrettable circumstances have made courtesy secondary. His accent was English, but flatter than William's, stripped of charm and almost entirely of warmth. Daisy did not offer him a seat until several seconds had passed. It was a small thing, but I saw that he noticed. When she finally gestured to the chair opposite us, her voice stayed cool when she finally spoke to him after he sat, folded his hands, and settled. If you have come to discuss William Taylor's obligations, save your breath. My late husband made his position on that matter abundantly clear. He shook his head. I have not come about Mr. Taylor's debts. Not directly. Mrs. Lewis Taylor vanished from Sussex 4 days ago after attempting to sell documents that do not belong to her. My heart lurched. Daisy's expression did not move. What documents? She asked. The man answered. Pages from correspondence, account ledgers, names of intermediaries, dates, transfers. Material sensitive enough that my employer would prefer to recover it before amateur handling creates unnecessary disorder. I could actually hear my pulse. My mother, who had never met a bad decision she could not make worse, had stolen something from William's papers and tried to sell it. Of course, she had. They were struggling, and Allison Lewis Taylor did not do broke. Daisy leaned back, one hand resting lightly on the sofa arm, and for the first time, the visitor's gaze sharpened with something like respect. Daisy said if Allison took papers, then she is either hiding or already being hidden. Either way, marching into my home with a crest and a masked warning is not the same as making a request. So, let us be plain. Do you want my help finding her, or do you want to see whether we still have the papers? A silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Then the man held up his hands in a wait gesture, slowly reached into his coat, and laid a single photograph on the table between us. It showed my mother stepping out of a train station, looking over her shoulder in obvious fear. Scrawled across the bottom in black ink were the words, "She asked for protection. It expires tomorrow." For one long beat, none of us spoke. I kept staring at the photograph, and my mother's turned head and frightened eyes, and felt a bitter, unwilling twist in my chest. Allison had spent half my life proving that blood meant nothing to her unless it came with a benefit. But fear was fear, and I knew that look. I had worn it myself at 12 years old in a lawyer's office while she signed me away. Daisy folded her hands in her lap. Protection from whom? She asked. The man's expression did not shift. From the consequences of trying to auction names that should never have left private files, and they were there. Why don't you ask what you really want to know? I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded, considering that inside, everything shook with rage and fear. Daisy held up a hand. I know the question, and the answer is no. She has not been here, nor contacted us about what is in her possession. Now I want to know whether you think that's the truth. What I think isn't relevant to this conversation, he said smoothly.
That is not an answer, I said.
No, he agreed. It is the only one you are getting until I know whether Mrs. Taylor intends to be practical. A smile touched Daisy's mouth without warming it. I am always practical. That is why you are sitting in my house instead of searching it. He inclined his head a fraction, conceding the point. Mrs. Lewis Taylor requested safe passage in exchange for the material. My employer does not negotiate with amateurs, but he is willing to extend a courtesy to you. She can be collected tonight and put on a flight out of the United Kingdom under an identity that will not be traced back to Mr. Taylor's affairs. In return, every copy she made, every note she sold, and every original page still in your or her possession comes back to us untouched. My spine stiffened. We do not have his papers, I said before I could stop myself. The man looked at me, almost bored. Then, that part should be simple. I turned to Daisy, the second he finished. Absolutely not. We are not handing anything to men who speak in riddles and leave photographs on tables like threats. Daisy's eyes flicked to me, steady and unreadable. No, she said quietly. We are not. Relief flashed through me so fast it was almost dizzying, until she added, but we're going to collect Allison before someone else does. The visitor's gaze sharpened. Mrs. Taylor, this is not a matter for improvisation. Daisy stood. Everything I have survived in the last 2 years has been a matter for improvisation. She smoothed an invisible crease from her skirt. You will give us the address, and if Allison is alive when we get there, I will decide what happens next. Something changed in the room then, not surrender exactly, but recalculation. He reached into his coat once more and produced a second card, this one plain and unmarked, with an address in Lower Manhattan and a time written beneath it, 11:30 p.m. A car will leave from there, he said. If you intend to see Mrs. Lewis Taylor before her protection expires, you will come alone. No police, no private theatrics, and no delays. If my employer senses a trap, he will withdraw his courtesy. Daisy took the card, read it once, and handed it to me. So she's already in America.
Fine. Miguel drives, she said.
Bree, you're coming with me. I opened my mouth to protest, then closed it again. Of course, I was coming. Allison might have been a disaster in heels, but she was still my mother. The visitor rose, gave a slight bow that felt more like acknowledgement than respect, and let Miguel escort him out. Only after the front door shut did Daisy exhale. She looked toward the ceiling, where her son played obliviously 2 floors above us, then back at me. Where's something you can run in, she said. I have a feeling tonight is going to ask us for more than answers. All I could do for a moment was stare at her. I had no idea who this Daisy was, and it was truly mind-boggling to see this side of her. She raised her brows at me, and we both left to go change. Lower Manhattan looked sharpened after midnight, all wet pavement, reflected headlights, and windows glowing high above us like watchful eyes. Miguel drove with the calm concentration of a man who had done this sort of thing before, which was not remotely comforting. Daisy sat beside him in black trousers and a jacket, one hand resting near the small leather case on her lap. The address led us to a private parking entrance beside a glass tower that looked too clean for anything illicit to happen near it. A black sedan idled under the awning with its lights off. 2 men stood nearby in dark coats, hands visible, expressions empty. No one spoke as Miguel rolled to a stop. One of the men stepped forward, looked through the windshield, and gave a single nod toward the back entrance.
You have 5 minutes, he said.
No phones. No sudden decisions. Daisy smiled at that, cool as frost. Those are usually my best kind. Inside, the building gave way to a service corridor and then a bare office suite that smelled faintly of dust and fresh paint. My mother stood near the far wall in a cream coat that had once been expensive and was now rumpled at the hem, as if she had slept in it. Her hair was pinned up badly, her lipstick gone, and for the first time in my life, she looked smaller than the room she was in. The second she saw me, relief flashed across her face so nakedly that it knocked the breath from my chest. Brielle, she said, and then, to Daisy, you two should not have come yourselves. That would have been easier for everyone but me, Daisy replied. She did not move closer. What did you take? My mother's hands tightened around the strap of her handbag. Not enough, she said bitterly. I copied ledgers, letters, old payment schedules, anything I could get when William was too drunk to notice. I thought I could sell them and finally have something of my own. Her laugh came out thin and ugly. Instead, I learned that men who pay for secrets never like being reminded they exist. She sighed hard, eyes red-rimmed and too bright. William told them what I'd done and gave me up the second he realized it. A slow clap sounded from the doorway behind us. Every muscle in my body locked. The Englishman from our house leaned against the frame as if he had been there all along, his expression unreadable. "A moving reunion," he said. Unfortunately, Mrs. Lewis Taylor continues to mistake hospitality for immunity. Daisy turned with a calm that made me think of banked fire. "You said we could collect her. And so you can," he said. After one clarification. "Your mother sold one copy. We recovered the buyer, but not the package. Until it is back in our hands, no one is leaving." My mother went white so quickly, I thought she might faint. "I don't have it," she whispered. "I gave it to—" She stopped, too late. Daisy's head turned toward her with terrifying precision.
"To Junior," she said.
It was not a question, and I instantly knew she was right. Allison shut her eyes. Outside, somewhere beyond the service corridor, a car door slammed, and hurried footsteps began pounding toward us. Daisy reached for the leather case in her lap. Miguel stepped in front of me. And I understood, all at once, that we had not only come to rescue my mother from danger. The first man through the door was not William Charles Taylor Jr., but one of the dark-coated guards from the garage, breathing hard as if someone had shoved past him. William Jr. came a heartbeat later in a suit that had once been tailored well and was now pulled crooked at the shoulders, his face flushed and wild-eyed. He looked from our mother to Daisy to the Englishman in the doorway and made the mistake of grinning, as if this were still salvageable if he sounded confident enough. "Everyone needs to calm down," he said, lifting both hands. "I came to fix this." "Then start by telling the truth," Daisy said. She was still seated, which somehow made her seem more dangerous. She set the leather case on her knees and clicked open the brass clasp with one neat motion. Inside lay a slim stack of documents, photos, and a small black recorder. William Jr.'s eyes dropped to the pictures, and they widened before he could stop himself. Daisy noticed. Of course, she noticed. "You sold something that was never yours to touch," she went on. "To whom?" Junior dragged a hand through his hair and shot a furious glare at Allison. "Mummy said it was my chance to finally get ahead since we can't access Anson's funds, but I never sold it. There was an intermediary in Mayfair who said the names alone were worth millions if they landed with the right buyer." His laugh broke in the middle. Then Father tried to take over the deal, and the intermediary disappeared. Suddenly, everyone started acting like I'd lit the match that set London on fire when Father was the one who fecked it all. Daisy gestured to the leather case and said to the Englishman, "Anson kept records after he learned of your father's gambling addiction. Names, dates, meetings, threats. Who borrowed from whom, who lied, and your employer should consider if his or her name is on this list." What Junior had was something from the stash. The Englishman's face lost a degree of polish. He stared at it, jaw tightening, as did Junior's. Daisy snapped the case shut. "So, let me save us time. If my sister, my driver, and I do not leave this building in the next 2 minutes with Allison, copies of those recordings and these papers go to 3 attorneys, a federal contact, and 1 investigative journalist who despises rich men with criminal hobbies, and not only those who are English, though they are high on her lists." For the first time, the Englishman looked genuinely displeased. "You mistake my employer for a common thug," he said, each word clipped clean. "If those materials were released, the noise would inconvenience many people, some of whom are considerably less patient than I am." Daisy did not blink. "Then tell your employer to be grateful I still prefer order over spectacle. Once we are all safe, I'll burn all of this and the copies, and we'll stay out of each other's lives forever." He studied her for a long moment.
"Fine."
"The package your stepbrother moved was intercepted before it reached its final buyer," he said at last. "That buyer wants reassurance that no duplicates remain. He is on his way here now." As if summoned by the words, an elevator bell chimed somewhere down the corridor. My mother made a strangled sound. Junior went gray. Miguel's hand slid inside his jacket, and Daisy rose in one smooth motion, tucking the leather case under her arm. She looked at me once, steady, sharp, entirely without panic. "When I say run, she whispered and jerked her head to my mother. "You take Allison, and do not look back." I stared at this woman. I had no clue who she really was and was doubting her being a fifth-grade teacher. Before I could question Daisy, the outer door opened, and a man's voice I had never heard before said, with terrifying calm, "No one leaves until I have the child's inheritance account numbers." The man who stepped into the room looked nothing like William's usual circle of desperate aristocrats and failing businessmen. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with dark hair cut close to the scalp and a face so composed it bordered on blank. Two more men entered behind him, then one peeled off to shut the door with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a gunshot. The newcomer's gaze moved over all of us and landed on Daisy, not because she was the loudest person in the room, but because she was so obviously the one no one else could afford to underestimate. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, "you have 90 seconds to decide whether tonight becomes a transaction or a tragedy." Daisy did not flinch. "That depends," she said, "on whether you are foolish enough to believe I would ever carry my son's account numbers into a room like this." She set the leather case on the conference table and opened it just far enough for the recorder and papers to show. "What I did bring is insurance. If my sister and I fail to check in by 1 o'clock, these records go public. Names, shell companies, transfers, collateral agreements, everything your friends have spent years pretending does not exist." The man's expression remained smooth, but one of his guards shifted almost imperceptibly, and I saw Daisy catch it. "So, let's not insult each other," she added. "You're not here for banking details. You are here to find out how much Anson knew before he died, and whether I am reckless enough to prove it." A thin smile touched the man's mouth. "Intelligent," he said. "Inconvenient, but intelligent." He took one step closer to the table, and Miguel moved at the same time, just enough to make every eye in the room recalculate distance. Daisy's voice turned razor-sharp. "Now, Brie." I did not wait to be told twice. I caught my mother by the elbow and hauled her toward the side door we had entered through. She stumbled once in her ridiculous heels, swore under her breath, and then finally found enough terror to move properly. Behind us, someone barked an order, a chair skidded, and the air seemed to split with the sudden violence of men deciding courtesy had expired. Miguel was on us a second later, one hand at my back, the other gripping Allison's handbag because she had nearly dropped it in the scramble. We tore down the service corridor toward the garage entrance, our footsteps slamming against concrete. Somewhere behind us, a crash echoed, followed by Junior shouting that he had not told them everything, that there was another copy, that he could get it. My mother made a strangled noise. "He's lying," she gasped. "He doesn't know where it is." I rounded on her even while running. "Who does?" Her answer came out half sob, half confession.
"Claire."
We burst into the garage and reached Miguel's SUV just as the security gate began to grind downward. I shoved Allison into the back seat and spun, expecting Daisy to be right behind us with that terrible calm still on her face. She wasn't. The corridor yawned empty for one impossible second, then the elevator at the far end chimed open again. Miguel swore, yanked open the driver's door, and looked at me hard.
"Get in."
"If she doesn't clear that corner in 5 seconds, I'll take you both away without her." My hand was still on the rear door, my pulse battering my throat, when I saw Daisy appear at last, running now, one arm clamped around the leather case, blood bright against the cuff of her coat. She hit the concrete hard on the turn, caught herself against the wall, and kept coming. Miguel threw the SUV into gear before she even reached us. I yanked the rear door wider, and Daisy flew inside with a hiss through her teeth, the leather case still locked under one arm as if it had been welded there. I tore open the front passenger side and climbed in. "Go," I snapped the moment both doors slammed shut. The gate was halfway down. Miguel floored it anyway. Metal shrieked against the roof rack as we shot beneath the descending barrier, sparks skidding bright across the windshield before vanishing behind us. At first, no one spoke. The city blurred around us in streaks of light and rain-dark glass, while my pulse thudded so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Then I twisted in my seat and saw the blood properly. It wasn't pouring, thank God, but it was enough. Bright against Daisy's cream blouse where her coat had fallen open, soaking the cuff and tracing a thin line down the inside of her wrist. "Daisy," I started. "I'm fine," she said automatically, which was how I knew she wasn't. Miguel handed back a small black medical pouch without taking his eyes off traffic. I grabbed gauze with shaking fingers and passed it to my mother. The cut ran along Daisy's forearm, shallow but ugly, as if someone had caught her with broken glass or a knife meant as a warning rather than a kill. She barely flinched while Allison pressed gauze to it and wrapped the bandage too tightly in her panic. "Junior knocked over the conference table," Daisy said, her voice clipped with frustration. "The buyer's guard went for the case, but I held tight. He kept his dignity, barely. Everyone else lost theirs. Despite everything, a ragged sound that might have been a laugh escaped me." Daisy leaned back and closed her eyes. The Englishman wasn't lying about one thing. They are terrified of duplicates. My mother made a broken little sound. I had almost forgotten she was there, now curled into the corner with her handbag clutched against her chest like a shield. "Claire didn't keep it for money," she whispered. "She took the copy because she thought it would buy her freedom." I glared at her, tired of this woman and her secrets. Freedom from what? Allison stared at the passing lights outside, as if she could not bear to look at either of us. From William. From the estate. From a marriage he arranged for her to some Viscount's son with gambling debts of his own, and the Viscount promised to bail them both out with a marriage. She hid the packet before she ran.
My mouth went dry.
"Ran where?" Allison swallowed. "Chicago." Daisy's eyes opened at once. All the pain went out of her face, replaced by the cold, lucid focus I had seen on the worst days of her life. "Of course she did," she murmured. "It's the one area she thinks no one would connect to me because I've never even visited there." She looked at Miguel and said, "Change of route. We're not going home." Then she turned to me, blood drying at her cuff, the leather case still locked beneath her hand. "If Claire is in Chicago with that copy, we need to reach her before London does, so call the airfield. Tell them get a pilot to fly us to Chicago, now." "I'm calling Dad first," I told her. He answered on the second ring, his voice tight enough to tell me he had been near the nursery door waiting for bad news. I told him only what Daisy allowed. Allison was with us. There had been trouble. The baby was not to leave the safe room, and no one unfamiliar was to be admitted onto the property under any circumstances. He started to ask if Daisy was hurt, but she took the phone from my hand long enough to say, "I'm all right, Teddy. Lock the house down and trust Miguel's team." She hung up before he could argue. The car was quiet as Miguel cut through uptown traffic like he had bribed the laws of physics. Allison sat frozen behind me, occasionally releasing a hitch with her breathing. My mother whimpered, "I cannot believe 3 of my children are caught up in William's mess." Daisy snorted and said, "Kinda makes you wish you had only dropped your knickers for Teddy, doesn't it? Junior, David, and Claire could have still been here because you could have easily made them with Teddy. Your consequences are rubbing off on your kids, so that means this is all your fault, your mess. Was that dick worth everything that's going on now? And when you abandoned your daughter for an accent and money that's no longer at your disposal, Allison?" My mother silently flushed, but I could not argue with Daisy's reply. A medic met us on the tarmac in white plains to clean Daisy's arm, close the cut with neat adhesive strips, and tell her she'd need stitches if it reopened. She thanked him with a sort of politeness that made grown men stand straighter. The jets smelled of leather, coffee, and antiseptic by the time we were airborne. Once the cabin lights dimmed and New York fell away beneath us, the adrenaline that had been holding me upright began to ebb. Daisy leaned back with the leather case at her feet, and her son's silver rattle clutched in her uninjured hand, a habit, I realized, not sentiment. She carried one of his toys at all times, as if proof of him made her harder to break. At 30,000 feet, with nowhere left to run and nowhere soft to hide, Allison finally started talking. Claire had not fled blindly. Months earlier, while pretending to plan charity events for the estate, she had made quiet contact with a woman in Chicago named Pearl Mercer, the same woman whose daughter had borne William Jr.'s child. Pearl's sister, Opal, lived on the south side of Chicago. Claire needed to hide, Brielle, Allison said, twisting tissues between her fingers. Maybe you'd help her before Daisy would. I laughed once, without humor. Claire has always been terrible at reading a room. Chicago greeted us with lake wind and a sky just beginning to pale at the edges. Miguel had a car waiting before the wheels stopped rolling. An hour later, we turned onto a quiet block of brick two-flats and shuttered storefronts where the bakery signs were still dark and the sidewalk shone from an overnight wash of rain. Pearl Mercer's sister, brother-in-law, and niece lived above a beauty supply shop they owned with flower boxes someone had stubbornly kept alive. Miguel killed the engine and scanned the street. Daisy reached for the door handle, then froze. Across the road, half hidden behind a delivery van, sat the same dark sedan we had seen outside the glass tower in Manhattan. Back entrance, Daisy said quietly. If they're watching the front, Claire still has a chance. Put these in your ears first, Miguel insisted, giving me and Daisy earbuds. We moved fast and low, cutting through the alley beside the shop while Miguel stayed with the car to keep an eye on the sedan. The metal stairs behind the building shook under our feet. Opal Hemmings opened the rear door before we knocked twice, took one look at Daisy's bandaged arm and my mother's ruined coat, and swore under her breath, stepped aside and said, "She's in the living room, and she's been crying for an hour." Claire was sitting rigid on the edge of a floral couch, gripping a manila envelope to her chest. She looked up when we entered, and whatever speech she had prepared collapsed the moment she saw Daisy. "I wasn't going to sell it," she blurted. "Not really. I just needed enough to make Father stop deciding my life for me." Daisy crossed the room one measured step at a time. "Give it to me," she said. Claire's lip trembled. "Will you let them have me if I do?" For the first time all night, Daisy's face softened, but only slightly. "No," she said. "But I will let you live with what you nearly helped destroy." Claire stared at her for a second longer, then burst into tears and shoved the envelope into Daisy's hands. "I deserve that, I think." Miguel's voice came through my earpiece, low and urgent. "They're moving." Standing, Daisy opened the envelope, pulled out the copied pages, and handed me the leather case. Then, right there in the damp Chicago morning, she tore the packet cleanly in half. Claire made a strangled sound behind us. My mother actually gasped. In the kitchen, Daisy tore the pages again and again until the names and numbers were nothing but ragged scraps, then passed them to Opal, who dropped them into a dented metal bucket, and we all ran down the back stairs. By the time the dark sedan rolled around the corner, the only thing left of William's leverage was gray ash. The men who got out of the sedan saw the smoke first, then Daisy standing in the alley with her shoulders squared and the recorder case tucked beneath her arm like a verdict. No one reached for anything. No one needed to. The point had already been made. The Englishman stepped from the back seat last, took in the ash, Claire's white face as she stood on the bottom of the metal stairs, and Daisy's expression, and gave the smallest nod I had ever seen. "I see we have taken care of the copy," he said. "We have," Daisy stressed. "As for the rest, if your employer values quiet, he will make sure Taylor and his son's feet never touch American soil again." The Englishman's gaze flicked briefly to Allison, who shrank where she stood, then back to Daisy. "I will convey the request." I watched Daisy in awe when the others left, wondering where this side of her came from. She caught my gaze and shook her head. "When we're old and rocking on our porch watching the grandchildren play, I'll tell you everything." I blinked, wanting to know something. "Fine," Daisy finally sighed. "One question. Make it count." I swallowed, thinking as we walked to the car. "Were you really a teacher?" I whispered. She twitched her lips for a moment, then said, eventually. By nightfall, Allison was on a plane to Arizona with an allowance Daisy called generous, and I called wildly undeserved, plus strict instructions to stay put. Daisy agreed to fund Claire's education on the condition that she do it in New York and that she listened to me on everything until she was able to think clearly as an adult. We returned to Westchester with locked gates and maple trees and a little boy who toddled across the kitchen floor into Daisy's arms as if she had only stepped out for milk. Later that night, I asked Daisy, "Do you think it's over?" Daisy looked at her sleeping son, then at the view from the window. "The worst of it is, maybe that was the most any of us could ever promise." But as I stood there in the home she had built from sacrifice, ruin, and sheer force of will, I realized it was enough. We had not come through untouched, but together. And for the first time since my mother left when I was 12, that felt more like an inheritance than a loss. William lost his family's estate before Christmas, after Allison divorced him with no fight. She was enjoying her life in Arizona with a man she met on a golf course.
Typical.
William Jr. lost his engagement, then finally acknowledged Pearl's granddaughter in a courthouse, so plain it might have offended his ancestors. He married his daughter's mother and became a guard at his former estate. We felt no sympathy for William, even after he moved in with Junior and his wife. A few weeks after my 36th birthday, happiness arrived so gently that I almost did not trust it at first. It came in the shape of a man named Howard Vickers, who was a new member of our state team. The first time he came to the house, Anson James toddled straight into his arms as if he had known him forever. Howard laughed, easy and warm, and when he handed the little tyrant back to Daisy, he looked at me with a steadiness I had spent half my life wanting without knowing how to ask for it. He fit into our strange, loyal, overprotective household with suspicious ease. Dad adored him because he showed up early and stayed late when something needed fixing, and he knew how to maneuver around the entire estate without needing tutelage. He knew horses, soil, and farming. Sonia loved him because he never entered the kitchen empty-handed. Daisy trusted him because he never once treated her fortune like an invitation, only her family like a privilege. As for me, I loved him in the quiet way a bruised heart learns to do first, carefully, then all at once. We were married under the maples behind the house on a bright June afternoon, with Anson James throwing rose petals in determined handfuls and Daisy crying harder than I did. The day after we returned from our honeymoon cruise, Howard went right back to work on the estate. That garnered even more respect from my family. Our children came one by one and filled the Westchester house with a kind of joy I had once believed belonged only to other people. First, there was Howard Jr., solemn-eyed and stubborn as any Rayburn man worth knowing. Then Thomas, who laughed in his sleep and followed Anson James everywhere like a shadow. We had Grace soon after Thomas, then ended with Francis when Daisy remarried. His name was Peter Bayless, a professor at Clare's University. He fit in with us well, and a year after the marriage, they welcomed Diane and Deanna 13 months later. We kept our rooms in the East Wing, just down the hall from Daisy and her family, and most mornings the house woke in layers. Coffee downstairs, small feet overhead, Sonia singing to herself in the kitchen, Howard already back from an overnight vigil with an animal and pulling one sleepy child after another into his lap, after Peter left for the university. It was noisy, crowded, imperfect, and so full of love that sometimes it felt like the walls themselves had softened to hold it. Sometimes, on summer evenings, I stood on the back terrace with Daisy after the children had finally gone to bed and watched the lights glow gold through the windows of the house she had bought when everything in our lives was still on fire. We would talk about nothing and everything: school pickups, trust meetings, teething, holidays, grief, luck. During one summer evening, as the men bathed the children for bed, Daisy revealed that she had taken security courses in college and had almost chosen to become a federal agent or to join one of the armed forces, but felt her mother wouldn't be able to handle her in any service. She kept up training through connections from her birth father. When she told Anson all she learned to do, he insisted she take shooting lessons and continue self-defense training. She did for several hours a day, even while pregnant. He wanted us to be safe, free, and to ensure that I'd be able to protect us if no one was around to help. My dad said the same thing my entire life, and I attended a class twice a week until I flew to England to marry Anson. Smiling, I said, "It sounds like Anson grew to be a better person." Daisy giggled. In some ways, he did. Every now and then, I would think about the girl I had once been, tired, lonely, working late in heels, still half waiting for someone to choose her. She would not have believed this life if I had laid it out for her in exact detail. A husband who loved me kindly, children who knew they were wanted, a home full of people who stayed. In the end, Daisy's house became more than a shelter or even safety. It became proof that what is broken does not always stay broken. Sometimes, if you are very lucky and very stubborn, it becomes the place where love multiplies.